So that's a really scary story, that story in Matthew. Really frightening. Herod the Great, this is not the same Herod that was ruling when Jesus was crucified. This is an earlier Herod called Herod the Great. Herod the Great was so threatened by Jesus' arrival and by the prophecies and the foretelling that he made this little plan. Right now, the lectionary for today gives us the story of what happened after the wise men went to see Jesus. Oddly, next Sunday is Epiphany, which is the actual day of the church year that we say, hey, the wise men went to see Jesus. So it seems a little out of order to me, but that's okay. I think the reason we have it today is to sort of keep us awake and keep us aware that there is darkness in the world. Even though love has come, even though the light is shining, there's darkness. If that darkness wasn't here, we wouldn't even need that light. You know, everything would be just fine. So we need the light. Herod was so paranoid that he tricked the wise men, or thought he did. Right? He told the wise men, okay, go find him, and then come back and let me know exactly where he is, because then I can come and pay homage to the king. Well, the wise men went, and they found him, and they had a little bit of a clue that somebody spoke to them, and they listened, and they were obedient, and they departed, and they went back a different way. They did not go and tell Herod. That gave us a little time. Okay? But Herod found out. He found out that he'd been tricked. No matter whether we're a good person or a bad person, if we have some special plan that we've come up with, something that we think, that'll work, that way we're going to get what we need, we're going to get what we want, I'm going to do it this way. It's a little sneaky, but I'm going to do it. He was enraged. He was tricked. Any of us that make some little scheme, it might be perfectly innocent and righteous, like trying to surprise somebody on their birthday and they find out about the surprise party, right? Yeah, but whatever it is, usually if we find out that we've been tricked or been found out, we get angry. Now, usually if it's a surprise party, we get over it and we have fun at the party. But that wasn't Herod's plan, was it? Herod wanted to get rid of this threat to his power. Herod wanted to keep his iron fist or whatever it was he had over the people. So he wanted to, of course, not go and pay homage to Jesus. He wanted to go get rid of him. So, okay, Christmas Eve, we had a wonderful service, lots of people, and it was a lovely, lovely story. And for those moments, we enjoyed the magic of Christmas, the story of this little baby born far from home, laid in a manger, shepherds, wise men, cradles, light of a star, angels. But this week, we're back to reality with this huge bump in the road. Right after the wise men, we hear about Herod. Now, all of the story of Herod is completely in character with everything we know about him. He was a fanatic, completely insecure. He had his wife, his mother, and most of his sons murdered because they were accused of plotting against him. He tried to get rid of everybody who was a threat to his power. He had planned this thing that at his own death, many of the leading citizens of Jerusalem would also be rounded up and murdered, because he said that he knew that no one would mourn for him, and he didn't want to die without some tears being shed somewhere. So Herod was a really nasty guy, right? So this is exactly the sort of guy that would be completely, frantically, paranoidally, if that's a word, worried about some royal pretender born in Bethlehem. And he'd be just ruthless enough to kill every child in town to get rid of him. It's a really hard story for Christmas. We're supposed to be happy and rejoicing in love and joy. And here we find out about genocide. I doubt that there's going to be a whole lot of sermons about this today. Most people want to revel in Christmas. And I'm not suggesting we don't, because at the end of this, there's a reason to. But the point here, and I don't know if I was having a brain cramp this morning or what, because our screen in my new laptop worked perfectly on Christmas Eve and I couldn't get it to work today. So I was doing something wrong and ran out of patience. Got mad, okay? But I had this cartoon up there that I was going to show you during this sermon. And it's of two sheep talking. And one of the sheep is talking about this horrible thing that Herod did. And the other one says, well, only God and only Jesus can take even the evil of this ruler like Herod and work out God's purpose and bring goodness and faith and hope into the world in the midst of this. Can turn around what the evil ruler is doing and turn it into good. And the other sheep says, guess Herod wasn't counting on that, Yeah, so I thought it was a cute little cartoon and I wanted to show it to you. But that's okay, we can talk about it instead. So what was going on when Jesus was born that Herod should be so paranoid and so able to do this? It wasn't a particularly idyllic time in history. Ordinary life at the time was hard and sometimes cheap. Rulers climbed to power by killing people and carrying out their own plans with no regard for ordinary people. In Luke's story, the one that we usually hear on Christmas Eve, Jesus arrives in Bethlehem as a result of the decision by a Roman emperor that, okay, we're going to do a census right now. Everybody go back to your ancestral towns and check in. Take a census. No thought at all as to how that would disrupt trade, cause chaos in everybody's lives. It's just, this is what's going to happen and you have to obey. You get a letter from the IRS, you just have to pay, right? You know, that's kind of what happens here. But Luke showed us God at work even in that really inconsiderate rule of the Roman governor, that because of this, they go to Bethlehem. And because of that, Jesus is born in Bethlehem. And as we heard in the readings, the prophecies then are fulfilled, that he'll be born in Bethlehem. Now, one thing that's interesting, Matthew doesn't seem to know about that story. If you go and you try to compare them side by side, Matthew just thought that that was Mary and Joseph's hometown, and that they made that move to Nazareth, where he became the Nazarene, after they got back from their little trip to Egypt. But both Luke and Matthew are showing us how God works his purpose out in spite of all of these challenges. We see a whole bunch of prophetic fulfillment in Matthew. Hosea, who said, "Out of Egypt I have called my son," and Joseph and Mary and the baby go to Egypt. Why Egypt? At the time, believe it or not, not so much today, although a little bit today, Egypt was one of those places where people would go as refugees. And then the other thing about why Egypt, it's the parallel from the Old Testament journey out of Egypt for Israel. That later, Jesus comes back out of Egypt, fulfilling that prophecy. And this time, of course, representing Israel and doing it right. So Egypt is of great importance. God brings people out of slavery by bringing them out of Egypt. Jesus came out of Egypt and brought us out of slavery. Jesus relived that story of Israel going to Egypt and coming back. Israel and Jesus were both tested in the desert. Of course, Israel got lost for 40 years. And Jesus didn't get lost for 40 years. But they had to come through the desert. The verse 18 of the Matthew passage that we read today about Rachel weeping for her children, we see back in the Old Testament in Jeremiah, where Jeremiah writes symbolically about her weeping as 100 years later her descendants were taken into exile in Babylon. So we keep seeing over and over again Israel or the descendants of Israel or Jesus' family being forced out of their comfort zone, being forced out of their homes, being forced into either slavery or some kind of refugee status, illegal aliens, so to speak. You know, let's think about our own immigration problems with that picture of people that are in a strange land. I think sometimes about military kids who move all over the place. You know, when I think about this story about Jesus, you know, they're in Nazareth, and then they go to Bethlehem, and then they go to Egypt, and then they go back to Nazareth, and somehow he's a Galilean. You know, and there's all these different places. There's a lot of pictures in this story that are uncomfortable. Soldiers going out and killing innocents. In the Catholic Church, this day is the Feast of the Holy Innocents, is the name of this. And it is referring to all of these little children that were killed. Today, in our world today, we can see some parallels to this problem. It's not easy to look at. Children, especially in some other countries, are more visible. It may be more comfortable for us to see. Or we see the children that are captured and turned into child soldiers. Some in Africa, I think some in South and Central America. Some are sold as sex slaves. Some are just kidnapped and held because someone is sick enough to do that. Some children are abused. Some grown-ups are too. It's not just children. It's almost as if these children in Bethlehem were targets of like rival gangs. You know, they get caught in the crossfire. These outrageous things happen all the time. Why? Is it God's will? I don't think so. But it's a really, really difficult question. These things happen because human beings choose to let them happen. It isn't that God chooses to let them happen. It's that we humans are stubborn critters. We don't want to be told what to do. We don't want to be obedient. We want everything to be comfortable and easy for us. And if it isn't, we get mad. We get scared. My God does not force me to do anything. My God inspires me My God opens my heart, my mind, my spirit, my ears, just for my asking. My God increases my faith, just for me asking. My God increases my strength, just for me asking. Now, sometimes he increases that strength by putting me through some sort of training program. Any of you ever had a personal trainer? Or maybe gone to the gym, and not really a personal trainer because you can't afford that little perk, but somebody shows you around and says, okay, this should be your routine. It will make you stronger. It's hard to stick to it. It's hard to stick to it spiritually. But my God will stick to it with me. I just have to listen and obey. And that strength that God builds in us by our study and being open to that Spirit and being obedient is the strength that can help us change the world, the universe. I admitted I am a Trekkie. I'm a Trekkie. There was a thing in Star Trek called the Prime Directive. To me, God kind of has a prime directive when it comes to our free will. It's not that God doesn't know what we're going to end up doing. And it's not that God doesn't have the strength or the power to make us do something. But anytime I'm forced to do something, I resent it. And I don't really stick to it. It isn't in my heart or my spirit. I'm kind of a bratty person about that. Bratty kid. Junior high. Some of you might relate to this and some of you might not. And honestly now I regret this particular streak of stubbornness in me. However, and I've been doing something about it. Sandy will tell you. In 7th grade, the school said, you will all now take Spanish. They didn't say, hey, you get to take Spanish. They said, you're going to enroll in Spanish now. They didn't say, you can pick Spanish or French or German or Italian. You will take Spanish. They have ways of making you take Spanish. They made us take Spanish. So I was mad. Now, I liked words and languages. It wasn't that. It was the way it was done. It was imposed upon us. 7th and 8th grade, I took Spanish. Got A's in Spanish. Did not retain it because I was angry. I didn't keep that skill. I went to high school and was immediately enrolled in advanced Spanish. I said, no, I will not take any more Spanish, because there I had a choice. I want to take Latin. The counselor looked at me like I was just insane, but it was a matter of principle to me. I didn't want to take Spanish because they decided that for me. And I wanted to impose my own free will and my own free choice. So I took Latin. I took 4 years of Latin. Then my last 2 years in high school, I added German. I took 2 years of German. Then I went to college and I had Latin and German. Didn't remember anything about Spanish. I could read it, however, because of the Latin. So then I started taking more German and Italian. I never took another Spanish class. Never, ever, ever. I really wish I had. So now I get these little CDs or these books or whatever, and I listen to Spanish, and I practice with Sandy, who helps me. The good thing is that I really can. I can read Spanish and Latin and French and Italian, all because of those 4 years of Latin. So at least I didn't totally abandon the Romance languages. But it was imposed. And I know that God doesn't do that. God can move our hearts and our spirits as we listen. In spite of our stubbornness and in spite of Herod's evilness, God still works God's purpose out. How? With people like us. With people like us listening. With people like us being obedient and following directions. Most of the time when we don't, or if someone really bad is out there hurting people, God doesn't excuse that person, or even us when we screw up, from the consequences of our actions. How else do we learn? I learned that I really wished I could speak Spanish better. So now, when I'm too old to learn a new language, I'm trying. Yeah.
Never too old.
Never too old. Thank you. Sometimes bad things happen to good people. And I know you've heard of that book. Those things don't happen because it's God's will for bad things to happen. Herod didn't kill those children because it was God's will. That was Herod's will. And the bad things that happen to good people, that happens because of bad people. The fantastic thing about all of it even though it's not an easy answer, is that we learn that we are the hands and feet and eyes and ears of God. We learn that for God's work to be done, we have to do it. We learn that God isn't some magical wizard up there that just grants wishes. God works through us by strengthening us and teaching us and showing us God's will. For every person in the stories of Jesus that he healed, there were probably hundreds that weren't healed. Jesus was a human. Part of the three-person head of God, the mystery of the Trinity, is probably beyond any human comprehension, to be honest. Divine and human at the same time. Some people say the ones that were healed because of their faith. Jesus tells us to pray for faith and he'll give it to us. Some people say the ones that weren't healed because it was God's will that they weren't healed. I don't believe that. But I do believe that in spite of their not being healed, that God's will could be worked in their lives. When we get to a place where there's no war, no sin, no greed, no crimes against humanity, I guess God's work might be done. Maybe we'll finally all be in that heavenly place. But until then, we have work to do. Lots of work. Some of that work is praying. Some of that work is stepping out and doing. I believe stepping out and doing is a form of prayer. And I believe we're taught to always be in prayer. That does not mean we walk around the street with our hands clasped and our eyes closed and our head bowed or our arms up, parading around showing everybody how we're praying. Prayer is being in touch with God. Prayer is sharing every single moment of every single day of your life. The story of the slaughter of the innocents isn't easy to hear. But it's good that the Bible, at least in this case, doesn't whitewash the issues. What it does is it brings those issues to our attention, and it helps us see where they are in our lives today. It inspires us to pray even more fervently, especially for those things that we cannot go and be hands-on. In addition to prayer being just an individual being in communication with God, the power of prayer together has this mysterious energy that can move mountains. When we pray together as a body, things happen. We've been praying for Sandy since July. And of course, she's still in the midst of treatment for cancer. We've been praying for Gloria. But they're both here. And they're bringing us joy with their presence. And they have good prognoses, both of them. That is a power of prayer. We prayed for Britt. You remember Britt, right? Britt thought he had to go back to Texas. The day he was supposed to move, he got a call from the theater in Palm Springs offering him full-time with pay every week to be their music director for their shows for this season. 9 months of full-time work. Prayer works. That means he's really busy and he can't always get here, but it does mean once in a while he might be able to come play for us again. When he can come, we'll enjoy it. We pray for our Relay for Life team. They broke their record last year. Prayer, staying in communication with God, in spite of the evil in the world, listening and following God, and working to fix it. That's our job. We're not going to let Herod get away with it. We are going to be those hands, feet, arms, eyes, ears of God. Knowing that in the midst of all the evil in the world, God is working his purpose out. The day will come when every hurt is healed and every tear is wiped away. That is the result of that love, that gift.